Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be showing you how to set up a C# project without a manager, without any of my templates, and 100% from scratch. How to set up your references, how I do it, and this is all with the assumption that you've already followed the previous tutorials. You don't want to use any of my managers. Let's say you hate me, you want to do it yourself, or you hate the managers, let's say. Whatever your reason being, we are going to set this up 100% from scratch. We're going to say how I set mine up. You can set yours up however you wish, but this is kind of the basics, not only on C# projects, but also just on Valheim, where to find your references. So I like to use Writer. Writer is my IDE of choice. Pretty much the same things can be done and set up and configured and all that stuff in Visual Studio. There's really not much difference between how to navigate the IDE. So to get started, we need to go to .NET Framework, class library in this case, and make sure that we are targeting the same .NET Framework that Valheim is currently targeting, which is 4.6.2. I like to put my solution in the same directory as I've mentioned before, and I'm going to do this as the tut project setup, right? And I'm going to hit create. So because this is not a template, because this doesn't have any references or anything set up, we're just going to get a blank class file. There's nothing in here for us. This is 100% from scratch. So the first thing that I do when I get into a project is I set up all of the stuff that I need for Valheim, right? And also some niceties for myself. I like to right-click on the project here, go to Properties, and change the lang version to 10, and then nullable reference types enabled. In Visual Studio, you will have to add these properties manually to your csproj file or csproj file. I don't know of any way to do it within the IDE. If you know it, do it that way. If not, edit the C# project or C# proj file manually and change these properties, or add the properties in this case. You'll be adding lang version and nullable reference types. So for Valheim, with our publicized assemblies that we had set up, both for debug and release, we are going to allow unsafe code, which actually adds the unsafe blocks portion into our csproj. I'll show you what all of this looks like in the csproj file in case you guys just need to mimic. So I'm going to click OK on this. And another benefit of Writer is Writer allows us to jump straight to the csproj file, as you can already tell. Visual Studio probably cannot do this. If it can, I don't know how. I don't use Visual Studio like that. But basically, what we just did is we added line 14, lang version 10, nullables enabled, and then down here it added line 26 for us. And line 36, where it says allow unsafe blocks is true for both the debug environment, which is what we see here, and the release environment, which is what we see here. So a few things that I like to set up is on my projects, my C# projects, or any of my templates, whatever, they all use this thing that I learned from Blackson. And I didn't know that this was a thing. I'm never really messed around too much with this, but you can actually create this property called a choose property. And what it's going to do is try and say, you're using Mac OS X or Windows, and try and find these references for yourself, right? This is going to reference by default the C program files, Steam apps, Steam apps common, Valheim. Okay, change this if this is not where your Valheim install is. But I highlight from the end of property group to item group, which goes to the end of choose and the start of choose, okay? So I highlight all of this because I'm way too lazy to retype this again. I grab this from any of my mod templates on my GitHub. So any of these here, if you just click on one and you go into the csproj file and scroll down a little, you'll actually be able to find the choose property. This is the end of it. And right here is the start, so this one's a little off, which is why I initially missed it. But I just highlight that, okay? I pull this into my CS proj file. I'll do the same thing. End of property groups, the last property group, and the start of item groups. Typically, I will just paste it in, right? So I'll go here and I'll paste it in, and I'll format that real fast. We'll use this in a minute. I'll show you what it actually does and kind of why it's here. So to set up the dependencies in the project, I've already got my publicized assemblies. I've got dependencies and stuff installed in the default Valheim install. I'm going to jump straight to that. In my case, again, it is in project files, Steam apps common, Valheim. These are the must-haves. You must have this in order to patch the game with Harmony. There's a few things that you can do to patch it with Mono instead, but I patch with Harmony. It's faster, it's lightweight, it's built on top of Mono, and in general, it has a lot of performance tweaks and fixes that Mono just doesn't have. So I jump into Valheim Bepinex folder, core, I grab bepinex.dll and zeroharmony.dll, and I click open. And then I go in here and grab more references. I go to Valheim, Valheim data, managed, grab our publicized assemblies, and you actually don't need them all. You really don't. You only need 3 by default. That's going to be the assembly Valheim publicized, assembly utils publicized, and assembly GUI utils or GUI or GUI utils, however you want to pronounce that. These 3 are the must-haves. I would grab these. These are the bare minimum, and click open. And then now we are going to reference the things that we need from Unity. By default, there is 2 files that you absolutely must have, and a third one, which 9 times out of 10 you're probably going to choose. So this comes with Bepinex, but it's called the unstripped core lib folder. We're going to scroll down and go to Unity Engine. Click that because we need that. And Unity Engine Core module, we need that as well. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to scroll up just a little bit further and find the Asset Bundle module. This is if you're bringing in an asset from Unity. For sake of argument, I'm going to go ahead and bring that in just in case I choose to rename this project or something later. But bringing in an asset, making sure you have core and Unity. If you need to reference things, let's say you want to check for a key press and stuff like that, you'll use input module, physics module if you're doing anything with the physics of the game or the physics of Unity in general, user interface or UI. All of that stuff will be found in this folder. So we're going to open that up. Now, we have all of our references set up. We have Bepinex, Assembly Valheim, Valheim Utils, GUI Utils, Zero Harmony that choose property that we set up in our CS proj file. That's what I tend to, and this is the portion that I learned from Blackson. It's actually under edit, my bad, into CS proj. So when we brought those in, what that does is creates a hint path to Zero Harmony or GUI Utils or whatever it is, and says ... go into this folder, program files, CMapps, Valheim, right? But if you notice, we already have C program files, Steam apps common, Valheim up here. What this does is it allows us to automatically just reference this. We don't have to type it over again or do anything like that. So if anybody downloads our mod, let's say we put it on GitHub, and they download it, if they have this path right here, this will automatically use the game path variable and say, okay, well, this is where it should be. If you left it as ... program files, Valheim, it's a potential breakage of the reference. So we're going to do a Control-Shift-H in my case. This is a replace. Do $, left parenthesis, game path, camel case, right parenthesis. And then click replace all in this case. It's only going to replace, of course, what's in this file, as we can see here. And replace all. And I do a quick format on it, which is a Control, Alt, and Enter for me. And I got that $ game path thing right here. This is what it is defined as the temporary shortcut. So this is where mine typically check for, Harmony DLL and all that stuff. So that is a way that I set up my projects. Now, most of you are going to go to the Bepinex documentation and create a plugin. You're ready to do that. This is, the setting up development environment drop down here. Make sure that you're on .NET, .NET installs. You can do all this stuff, but as you can see, I didn't really do all that. I already have .NET installed. Logging console, .NET, NuGet sources, index.json. You can do all of this if you really want. But really, we can skip to writing a plugin. The documentation here does recommend that we use Harmony over Mono simply because of the performance improvements. It does say that Mono is an alternative, so you can use it. Other games respond to it a little bit better, but Harmony loads faster and has just generic bug fixes and improvements. So you can choose to use .NET New, BepInEx 5 plugin, my first plugin. This is a command line. You can run that if you wish. We've already kind of set things up. We've got things going, and it does try to do like a plugin.cs NuGet configuration. Really, at this point, we can kind of just copy this. we don't need to do anything else. We already have a namespace in ours, as you can see in the background test project setup. And plugin class 1. We could call it plugin. We could call it base Unity plugin, whatever. We can actually copy from the namespace bracket to here and just copy and paste this in. Now, it's going to be red. With Writer, I could just do Alt-Enter and actually reference these at the top. As you can see, it references BepInEx, and it says plugin info.plugin GUID, plugin name, plugin version. These are red because they don't know what you want your stuff to be called. They aren't very sure of exactly how this is going to be set up and what you want to do. And it says, as we can see, the BepInEx plugin contains main 3 parts. A class that inherits this talks about more plugin startup code or other code. Specifying metadata with the attributes. So metadata, what this is a GUI ID. This is highly recommended not to change. This is what actually generates the configuration files for your BepInEx. So if I named mine like azumat.testproject I would then, once BepInEx loads this plugin into Valheim, it would say, azumat.testproject for my config file. And the mod name, this is what shows up in the BepInEx chain loader, so that nice big console window that most of you might be familiar with. And then, of course, your versioning here. So example plugin, this is the top bar. This is what they're talking about up here in this area. You can copy and paste this if you really want to, if you don't want to fix it yourself here. But I'll actually show you a different way to populate this and actually make it automatic almost. And all you have to do at that point is just change variables. So version of the plugin must follow the sim server versions or system versions. Absolutely must be unique. Okay, keep this in mind. This is GUID. It does explain these properties more than me. Read the documentation. Documentation will help you. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to people that you know that might be modding or doing things. But dependencies, it explains how the dependency property works. It talks about it. It says, hey, how to use it. It even gives examples. So I'm not going to go over that. I'm not going to tell you how to use it. This almost completely walks you through everything you need. It even says, if you're doing risk of rain, how to do that. And myassembly.dlls, item groups, compiling and testing. They're already at the compilation. You really don't need to do too much else. And by chain loader, this is what I mean. Loading my first plugin, if we scroll back up to the top, they did name theirs. They named theirs example plugin in this case. But this is the name. This is the name that popped out in that chain loader. It's just, it looks like they changed it halfway through the tutorial. So plugin, my first plugin is loaded, right? We could .NET build this and do whatever we want, useful tools, navigate through this. I tend to create logging sources. So logging messages, it does give you different things, logger.loginfo, and it does say logger test, which is the plugin name for the most part. Log resources, log sources, you can create one. I tend to have code that actually just adds a log source or creates. So I have this line in a lot of my projects because it outputs it for me, and I don't have to do all this crazy stuff. I don't have to say this.log equals base logger just to be able to use it in other files. I can just reference it automatically if I do it the other way. So some method, this some method is actually getting called, and it says some other class, my first plugin. Here's their thing that they have set up. So reading and writing configuration files, it goes over that. I would at this point recommend that you copy this. This is a good starting point to where you can copy the awake method, and we'll jump back to ours and paste the awake method. And these are configuration options. So it will go over it. It'll talk about it. If you notice in the background, mine are red. That's because I didn't define them. And this is how you define a configuration entry. And it's going to ask me to import this. You could import it yourself and using bepenx.configuration at the top. And it'll say, hey, cool, nice. And then bepenx.logging. So using bepenx.logging, right? We now have logging, log info, and then logging stuff, right? So we can choose to log this info out. We can say yay or nay. I tend to just hit Alt Enter in my case, and then say, bepenx harmony lib unity engine logger. Mine's bepenx logging logger. We'll set this up. The reason why this actually isn't loading is because we have errors prior to it. So go back, copy things that you need, set things up that you need, and just follow this tutorial really. It talks about how it uses keys, what the variables are, how to set them up, custom file.bind if you want to use a custom configuration file. It's where I learned kind of how to even patch using Harmony. So things that I'm going to do is we need to set up some of the variables so this thing isn't freaking out and isn't complaining at us, right? So I put this in the wrong spot. This cannot be in the method. It actually has to be out here. And then everything's hunky-dory. So the error that's up here is we didn't define a plugin GUI ID or a plugin name or plugin version variable or anything like that. But you can. You can say private const string plugin name, right? So we'll just call it plugin name. I really could have just copied that, but plugin name, my first plugin, and do that. So this plugin name can now actually be referenced here. We'll delete plugin info, and boom. So anytime that we change the variable here, it'll change here. But the main reason why you're like, well, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just type it? Is I actually go to the properties folder here and do assembly info. And assembly title here is the mod name. Assembly project is mod name. You can do the version. You can actually reference what's in your other classes. So you can say GUI ID. I'll copy this variable this time around. And we'll highlight this. Go down. Set this up. Plugin GUI ID is going to be our variable. And I tend to do my name. So I'll do like azumat dot my first plugin, right? You can just say, azumat plus or azumat dot plus plugin name, simple C# thing, and now that's the plugin GUI ID. We can delete this, set this up, do the same thing for version if you want to, or you can do a string. But once you have that set up, you can reference it here. So I'm going to reference the plugin GUI ID. So I'm going to do plugin. So base Unity plugin or plugin, which is in our test project, dot. And because I made these private, I can't access them from that class. So you can choose to make them internals. And I just quickly made them internal for example purposes. But now I can do plugin name. You can make them public. You can make them internal, protected, whatever you want to do. But as long as you can get them in this class, they're fine. So plugin name in this case. And then I can copy and paste up here. So the reason why I would do this in the assembly info file is the assembly info file pretty much tells us what's on the outside of our DLL. So if we didn't change this version here, every single DLL that we publish, when we hover it and look at it, would say version 1. We would not know anything else after that. So you can set up the plugin version, do it the same way I did as plugin names, and then all you have to do is build the project after that. You can do, in this case, is 1.0.0, and then build the project. So non-nullable fields, we can worry about that later. But now you can right click on this, show Explorer, bin, debug, and right there is our DLL. So if you have dependencies installed for Valheim, you can drag and drop that DLL in there, and you'll be able to not only see the configuration file, but also be able to see the logging info of Hello World. So that's how to get started. We'll talk about more of patching and how to actually patch into Valheim and do a Harmony patch. Read through the documentation, get to learn it, but I have a few things that are already set up. So like Harmony prefixes, player awake, and player awake comes from Valheim code. I'll inherit the Harmony patching, which is Harmony lib up here. And then you can set up prefix code, type it all out, and have it happen before the prefix or before the awake. And if it's a postfix, it turns into after the awake method of the default game gets called. So I'll do a more in-depth tutorial on how to do that. That'll be my Valheim know-hows and mixed with Harmony patching. So thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next video.